Good afternoon, everyone. We are really honored to have Professor Daly with us. This has been a collaboration which has been going on for more than a year before this clinic has actually been formally launched. Professor Daly, as those of you who studied constitutional law would know, has been somebody that we've been referring to in our courses. We have used her materials quite significantly in our courses, and so I thought it would be very useful for her to come and offer a course at Nasser, and we also wanted it to be available to people outside of Nasser. So we kept the class small. I know it is quite unfair to a large number of students who wanted to meet her, which is the reason we did the conference, so that anybody who would be interested in meeting with her and talking to her would be able to do that. And I hope that there will be some conversations outside of class as well. So anybody who's interested in catching up with her, we could kind of organize some meetings where you can get to interact and talk to her as well. So Professor Daly, the CV is like what I could take a day possibly to go through the entire series. So I'm not going to do that, but I think what was important for us and why we decided to do the criminal law focus was also because of her work with reference to criminal law and prisoners' rights. So I think we've also circulated her book, which is speaking to the question of indignity in the prison system, which is not exclusively focused only on the most or the worst forms of indignity that we are usually encountered with, but the very small and everyday and something which goes unnoticed, something which people will even ask you, why is this even a dignity question? The importance of focusing on those and also focusing on a personal responsibility. Dignity is not just something that you're asking others to perform, but it's also something that you need to perform as well. So it is both an inward as well as an outward looking lens. And I hope that the clinic is that component. So she has always believed in making that norm applicable. And so that is what has really fascinated us. And so we thought that the clinic format would be best for us to say, okay, if you needed to use this norm in a given context, how would you do it? But I thought it would be useful for us to have a set of lectures. So for today and tomorrow, we're only doing lectures so that you understand the breadth of the norm and the concept. And when we do the tutorial, we will meet with all of you in small groups and we'll speak to you and we'll discuss how best you would want to complete the assignment. I think all of you have received the assignment that we have in mind. So we can talk about it later. I would not want you to rush into the assignment right away. For now, just try and engage with the concept and see how best you understand it. We will always keep it interactive, but please note that if we have, the interaction needs to be moderated a bit so that we are able to receive the most of the information that is there. And we have the tutorial sessions for more elaborate discussions. We can have out of class. This is a residential program, so we can have discussions outside of class as well about things which are bothering us and things that we would like to know more about. So with this very brief introduction to both the course and to Professor Daly, no way I'm going to do justice to her phenomenal work, except that we are very excited and very happy to have you with us. And we're looking forward to see how this course will go forward. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. So the honor is really entirely mine. I'm just thrilled to be here. I was just so excited to be starting the conversations and getting to know Professor Vasanti, and then we sort of had this idea of a clinic. I run a clinic at my law school in the US, and so we have sort of like used that as a starting point and developed it further from there to apply in the context here. So would it be okay if we start just by going around the room and introducing yourselves? I'm going to tell you right now, I'm terrible with names. I've never been good at it. I'm only here for a week, so you'll forgive me if I don't know your name, but when I see you around on campus, just please introduce yourself, even if you've done it like 10 times, just please. And I would just appreciate that. And so let's just begin. Should we start with our tutor?
Hi, my name is Teja. I'm in my 5th year at Nalsat.
Also done the course
Yeah.
last year.
And she did the course last year, last semester. So she agreed to be a tutor for this class. So she'll be in the class, and then you'll also be able to meet with her outside of the class, and she'll be especially helpful in helping you shape the projects as we go along. So
I'm Manumya. I'm a fourth year law student. I go to Obidinda.
okay, welcome.
I'm a Jenny Iswas. I'm fourth year.
Here,
I'm Bharti. I'm fourth year.
from Hyderabad.
I'm Shreya. I'm also fourth year here at Nalsa.
Okay, great.
I'm Ravi Ravitran. I'm also in my fourth year. I go to ICFI in Hyderabad.
Oh, okay. We have an agreement with it, you can come to Delaware Law School to do an LLM.
I
They have one here. Okay. Okay, great, here.
Very last student from Karnataka State University.
Oh,
He is Kannada.
great, thank you.
I'm Mohammed Hussein from Chennai, practice
Ah, okay, wonderful.
I'm Aditya. I'm 14 law student here.
Okay, great. And I'm sorry, I should have a follow-up. What's your area of law?
ADR.
Okay, ADR.
Adding PGD ADR and PGD ADR to also.
Ah, okay, wonderful.
I am Sukhpal. I have done MA Political Science, Public Administration and Economics from Haryana.
Oh, okay. Great.
I'm Shobhan from Hyderabad. I'm an LLM constitutional law.
From where?
Acharya Nagarjuna.
Wonderful. Fantastic.
I'm Kranti. I practice labor and employment law in Bangalore.
Okay, great. Wow.
Kranti is a alum. Should also say that he's graduated from Nalsa.
Congratulations.
Ashi, I'm a fifth year here at Nalsa.
Wonderful. Sorry.
I'm Mitesh, fourth year LLB at KL University, Andhra Pradesh, and also an animator and VFX artist.
And also, I'm sorry, say that again.
At KL University, completed third year and entered fourth year.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, great.
I am Masud. I'm also a fourth year student at NASA.
Masud Zegmandan. I am a second year law student at Lash Forensics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Great.
I'm Stuti. I'm a fourth year student in Nalsa.
Okay, great.
Hi ma'am, my name is Sachin and I'm a fourth year student here at NASA.
Wonderful. So a lot of people from NALSAR and quite a number of people. I want to ask you a question, and I want you to write down your answer just to hold on to for now, not to turn it in or anything like that. But before we have one more word about this class, I just want to ask you what dignity means. So if you could just think about that for a moment and then write down an answer, 1, 2, 3 sentences. Nothing more than that. Don't look anything up. No citations. Just if a person asks you, do you know what dignity means? You'd say yes. What does it mean? Okay. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I do want to say something about the class and sort of the organization of class, which is we have a series of 3 lectures today, 1 hour each lecture, and the same thing for tomorrow. I will guarantee you that we will not do each lecture in exactly 1 hour. For one thing, we're starting late and we haven't even started to start yet. But I also will guarantee you that by the end of the 6 hours, by the end of tomorrow, we will be where we need to be. So don't get anxious if it's taking us a little bit longer than you expect. Okay, so I'm here because Professor Basante was ingenious enough to think of it and then actually to secure a grant from the Global Initiative of Academic Network. So I just want to shout out to them and thank them for sponsoring this and making this possible. And I think it's not only wonderful to sort of have the resources and the support to be able to travel and come here and meet with you all, but I think it's also sort of an indication of the importance that they ascribe to dignity in law, to the work that we're doing. So I think it's just a wonderful thing that to be here with their support. I'll just start by giving you a little bit of background about myself. I have been teaching, so I'm from the US. You all knew that probably. Has anybody ever heard of Delaware? The state of Delaware? Does anybody know anything about Delaware? Have you ever, like, you've heard of the fact that it's a state in the US? Do you know anything about it? Okay, good. Thank you. Yes. Biden was from Delaware. So if you only know, two people in Delaware, now you know about Joe Biden and you know me. And Biden actually, politics aside, Biden was actually an adjunct professor with us for many, many years, up through the time that he became vice president. So we are sort of very proud of that connection. He taught constitutional law. He taught a class that we used to informally call Whatever Joe Wants to Teach, but it was really a constitutional law class. Anybody know anything else about Delaware? Anybody? I know we're sort of doing dignity and human rights and all that's great. Anybody study corporate law? About, now I don't know the numbers, but 2/3 of all of the Fortune 500 companies are incorporated in Delaware. All of the major companies, if you just list in your head companies that are based in the US, the chances are very good that they're based in Delaware. We have a very strong corporate law culture, and that makes it an interesting place to do human rights law, because I'm not a corporate law person, I'm a human rights person. So, okay, so that's Delaware. I was at Delaware for many, many years. I was fortunate enough to be able to teach constitutional law and administrative law, First Amendment, things like that. And then as my work sort of shifted to dignity rights, I started to teach more in that area also. And then we established a Dignity Law Institute at the law school and then started a clinic about 4 or 5 years ago. And the clinic now has two sort of sections to it. We run it in two different ways. One is, as Professor Basanti mentioned, purely as a clinic that focuses on criminal law. And we work in association with my co-teacher in that class is with the Delaware ACLU, if you're familiar with that organization, the American Civil Liberties Union. And he's a litigator, he's the legal director of that organization in Delaware, and he represents sometimes individuals and sometimes classes. And the work that we do together is specifically prisoner rights in Delaware. So we've been doing a lot of that work. My students have been working in various aspects of criminal law in the US and specifically in Delaware for a long time. And the very first year, actually, of the clinic, they wrote papers on different aspects of dignity in the criminal legal system. Dignity in terms of arrest, or dignity in terms of sentencing, or dignity in terms of release and reentry, just all these different aspects of it. We took those papers and we turned them into a book, and that's the book that Professor Basanti was referring to. So that's sort of a co-production of the clinic students. The other clinic course that I run is really very different. We work with an organization in Delaware that that brings law to school children, partly to introduce them to the idea of law, partly to introduce them to lawyers and to sort of help them make that connection so that they know something about law and lawyers other than what they see on TV, which isn't always great. And so we've been working with them and we've been developing materials for school children to understand dignity. We made a set of posters, we made some coloring books about dignity, we made some books for older students about dignity in that class, and we're developing curricular material and stuff like that. And I mentioned both of those to you just in part just because it's just two different models of a dignity clinic. And in part because in a way we've sort of fused those ideas in this clinic, because what we're interested in doing substantively is focusing on dignity in the criminal law. But in terms of what your project is going to be, and we'll talk more about this later, but just to sort of say, the idea is to sort of bring what you're learning as lawyers and as aspiring lawyers about dignity in law to a broader audience. It's one thing to learn about the law so that you can speak to other lawyers about it. And it's sort of a different set of skills to be able to take what you're learning in law school or in a clinic and then speak to other audiences. So that's where we are. This was a conference that we did at Delaware Law School earlier this year in April that was also sort of part of the, we built on that a little bit for the conference that we had a couple of days ago. I left Delaware Law School as a full-time faculty member in right around the time that I was here in September to start an organization, a nonprofit organization called Dignity Now. And I won't go through it. The website is dignitynow.live. And you're welcome to see the work that we do. And much of that is about bringing dignity to non-lawyers and encouraging, sort of creating spaces for people who are not lawyers to think about dignity and dignity rights. I do want to mention also, though, that on our website, we do have a lot of legal resources that are meant for people like you. So there's a lot of general resources. There is a database. There is a link to a database of constitutions that contain dignity provisions, the 170 or so constitutions from around the world that contain dignity provisions. And there's also on that website a database of dignity cases from around the world. It has about 500 cases in it. It's very, very, very incomplete because there's thousands of cases and we can't keep up. But it's designed, it's searchable, and it's really designed to be, as far as I know, it's the only collection of dignity cases that exists as such. So it's cases about all different kinds of things, and we'll talk today about the range of dignity cases. But it's geographically, I mean, it sort of spans the whole globe. There's a different page for different regions of the world. And there's cases about all kinds of things, and it's fully searchable. So if you're interested in what courts have said about abortion and dignity or death penalty or whatever it is, you can search this paper. So I encourage you to take a look if you're interested. So that's, I think, all I have to say about me. I'll just say one other thing about me while I'm here. I am here through until the 13th, so right after the class ends. And I'm really here just to teach this class and to meet you and to talk with you. So I really do encourage you, as she mentioned, I do encourage you to find a time to talk with me outside of class, either before or after. We can set up a time. So please feel free to do that. I would love to spend time with you in class and outside of class. Okay, so this is sort of what we're going to be doing the next couple of days. And as I said, we're not going to get through all of this today, but we will make up the time. So, and part of that is not just because of the time for introductions and everything. Part of that is just taking the time to sort of lay the foundation so that the rest of it makes more sense. Okay, I wanted to say something else. Sorry, I'm going a little bit out of order. I wanted to say something about the goals of the clinic. The goal is, and this is ambitious because we only have a week. These are sort of the kinds of goals that I would set out for a semester. We only have a week, so we'll do what we can, right? But the first is just to understand the role of dignity in law in India and also globally, just to sort of understand the connection between dignity as you understood it, as you wrote it down, and the law and the place that it has. Dignity has a lot of different meanings. And one of the things that if we had time and we could share what you wrote, my guess is you wrote each different things. So you each have a different idea of what dignity means. My guess is also that there would be some overlapping consensus. You would all be in agreement, even though you'd use different words to describe it. So what we're looking at is when we look at cases, when we look at the legal instruments, constitutions or international documents or whatever, to understand what do they mean when they use that word dignity? Which version of dignity is it? Professor Vasanti mentioned in her introductory remarks how it's sort of two-faced. It's both internal and external, right? It's in-looking and inward-looking and outward-looking. So when you look at the word dignity in a document, we want to try to think about why did they choose that word and what do they mean by it? Because it's not self-evident. There's no black letter law definition of dignity. I'm interested in dignity law for a whole bunch of reasons, but one of the things that I think is really interesting about dignity as a legal concept is that it is sometimes a value in a constitution. You see that when it's in a preamble, for instance, right? And sometimes it's a right. People can go into court and say the government action violated my dignity. And what I've been fascinated by is what I mentioned a moment ago about the database, but just how many cases there are around the world about dignity in different contexts. And when you look at those cases, you'll see that dignity, even when it's a right, it's not just a normal right. It has unique features. And so part of it is understanding that there's a right to freedom of speech and a right to clean air and a right to whatever, all the other things that you think of as rights. But a right to dignity has these unique features. It's like it's made out of different clay, sort of. So understanding that, and then learning the vocabulary and being able to use the new terms that we'll see in the cases and in the literature. So dignity is shorthand for a bunch of different concepts, right? That was, and the cases use certain vocabulary when they're talking about dignity. For instance, just to give you one example, a lot of cases will talk about the free or full development of the personality. When they're protecting somebody's right to have dignity, say in a case about education, for instance, they might say, yes, there's a right to education, as your court did in Mohini Jain. There's a right to education. Why is education important? Because it allows people to freely or fully develop their personality. And that's important for their dignity. So we'll see a phrase like that in the cases. And we want to start paying attention to that vocabulary of dignity. It's shorthand for all these other things. So I just want to sort of be clear about what sort of some of the things that we're going to try to accomplish in the next few days. The readings. So you got a list, I think yesterday, of readings. I hope none of you fainted when you saw that list. I know it was, you might have at least gasped when you saw that list. So let me say something, and we haven't had actually the time to talk about this, so I'm just going to say this for the materials for my section, for my lectures. You can think of it as sort of background reading. The idea, we're not going to have time in this class to go into details in any case, in any specific case. But I'll refer to cases or I'll refer to documents. And I wanted you to have access to those cases, to have easy access. They're all on the web, so you have access to them. But I just wanted you to have easy access to them. Maybe if you have time, you can skim them. If there's something that's of particular interest, you can skim it. But I wanted you to just sort of know these are the documents, whether they're cases or legal or treaties or whatever. These are the documents that we're going to be talking about that form the foundation of our study. And in this little PowerPoint I made, I have about 6 slides of the readings. So I just want to, for today, it was really just the legal instruments, right? I mean, for the first lecture today, just the legal instruments that we'll be talking about that form the foundation of dignity law. For tomorrow, this is a Canadian case, RV Cap, about equality and just the way the Canadian court thinks about dignity in terms of understanding equality. This is an Indian case, of course, that you're all familiar with. So when we look at cases also, when we talk about them, a case like this, for instance, there's a whole lot you could say about it, right? This raises a whole lot of different issues. We're going to sort of laser focus on what these cases say about dignity. So a lot of our study of cases is going to be, yes, there's all this going on. It's a few hundred pages long, and we're focusing really closely on this one paragraph. So it's sort of a different kind of way of studying a case, but that's what we're going to do. Same thing there. And then for tomorrow, is this the case that any of you have heard of from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights about states' obligations in relation to climate change? It was issued 2 days ago. No, by now 5 days ago. I think it's a very significant case for those of you who are interested in environment, climate. I think it's a significant case. It's a few hundred pages long. I gave you the paragraph numbers that are particularly relevant to dignity. Again, it sort of gives you a distorted view of the case because it's only focused on one thing, but it's to highlight what we're going to be talking about here. And again, I do not expect you to read it. It's there if you want to look at it, if you want to just sort of get a sense of truly the most up-to-date statement on dignity, particularly in the context of climate change. You can do it. It's only available in Spanish, and the Sabin Center at Columbia University instantly created an English version of it with, thanks to ChatGPT, I think. And this is what you're reading, so it's not even an official version. And then we'll focus by the last hour tomorrow. We'll start focusing on criminal law. So the first few hours today and tomorrow are much more general, and then we'll focus on. Okay. And then, do you want to say anything about readings? Okay. Okay. This is your reading list. Okay. I think we'll also talk later about the projects, but unless anybody has any burning questions now. Okay. Okay. Any questions, observations, concerns, anxiousness? All right, let's talk about the history of dignity in law. So, does anybody know when the first time dignity was mentioned in a legal document? Okay, I don't either, because that was way too broad, like it could have been mentioned in a contract or any kind of legal document. I just wondered if anybody wanted to suggest something. Okay, so the first time it was used in a constitution was in 1917, and it was the Mexican Constitution of 1917, which took place after a revolution. Sort of a popular revolution, overthrowing the monarchy and addressing land rights and all kinds of stuff, like a real social and political and economic revolution. And the aftermath of that was a constitution that mentioned dignity in the context specifically of education. That education, I think it actually has that phrase about full development of the personality, that education should be designed to help the child fully develop. And I mentioned that it was a post-revolutionary constitution because while that's not always the case, it is often the case that dignity shows up after times of upheaval, shows up in law. That's certainly the story of dignity in a lot of constitutions and in international law. So I just want you to tuck that away. Just think about why it is that dignity shows up in constitutions and international legal instruments after some kind of time of upheaval. We'll talk more about this. And in the early part of the 20th century, it was in a handful of constitutions. It was mentioned in the Constitution of Finland and Germany, Ireland, a few other places, not that much. And as far as I know, there wasn't much case law or anything about it. It was just there. And it was mostly there in sort of social republics as a way of talking about that under the Constitution, people had a right to live with dignity, to live with some level of dignity. That's its use in these early constitutions. And then, so these are constitutions from the 1910s, 1920s, a little bit 1930s. And then the world breaks out into the second of the world wars of the early 20th century, right? So we don't need to talk about that, but that is sort of the backdrop of this. And of course, the Second World War was horrific in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of places around the world. And in 1945, the nations of the world, some of the independent nations of the world came together to create the United Nations. And the Charter of the United Nations says, "We, the peoples of the United Nations," this is a 1945 document, "determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind." So remember, the people writing this, 1945, World War II has not even ended, right? It's still like the atrocities are still going on, right? In all kinds of ways. And they're coming together and they're saying, wait a minute, we need to save the world from the scourge of war because we just did it 30 years ago. We did it again now. And if we're not careful, we're going to do it again. So we're coming together to stop that. The second, you can see there's 4 paragraphs here. But the second one says, I want to see what it looked like. So that's why that's there. I don't expect anybody to read it, but that's what it says. The second purpose of the United Nations is to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small. And since I'm at it, I'll just read the rest of it. The third is to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. And fourth, to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. So first, we need to end war. And second, we need to reaffirm faith in human dignity. And the point here is that the UN Charter doesn't explain how those two things are connected. It just sort of says it is connected. One of the first things that the United Nations did was it created a Human Rights Commission. And it charged that commission with establishing an international Bill of Rights. It didn't fulfill that obligation. It created instead a universal declaration of rights, not a Bill of Rights that would be binding, but a declaration of rights. And the Universal Declaration of Rights is really sort of the moment where the idea of dignity as a legal concept is born. It's mentioned in the UN Charter not as a legal issue. Here, 3 years later, in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which mentions dignity, I forget, I think it's 5 or 6 times. Several times in the preamble, and then once very prominently in Article 1, and then several times in other places. But we're just going to talk about the preamble in Article 1 quickly. I should say, let me just say, I'm just going to talk and talk and talk. But if you have questions or if something's not clear, or if you just want me to repeat something or whatever, please feel free to interrupt. Okay, there will be, it's okay. It's totally okay. And in fact, would be helpful. So just please feel free. Okay, preamble. The very, very first words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. I think that's just a remarkable sentence in so many ways. One thing is, remember, the task is to write a Bill of Rights, which in some way is going to be connected to ending the scourge of war. And the way they do that is by starting off with the principle of human dignity, right? So it tells you right off that dignity is going to have a very important place in the post-World War II world order, right? We know that just from the opening sentence. We know that dignity is inherent. As opposed to what? Why do they say that dignity is inherent? What's the significance of saying that it's inherent? The inherent dignity of all members of the human family. Exactly. So right now, remember I said that dignity sort of has some unique features in law? Well, right here is one of them, right? That rights are things that governments grant you, which is lovely when they do, and not so good when they decide to take them away. So that can be problematic, to depend on governments for your rights. You don't depend on anybody for your dignity. All you have to do is be born a member of the human family. That's all you have to do, and you have dignity. Okay? So we hear right here from the very first line, dignity is inherent. So this is a quality of all members of the human family. It's universal. It's with everybody, not just fancy people, not just people who are rich, not just dignitaries, but all you have to do, again, is just to be born, and you have this inherent dignity. Dignity, and then in the same sentence, and of the equal and inalienable rights. So we don't really know what dignity is or why they're using it. We know that it's something that's inherent, but it's associated with rights. Yes.
Two questions there, right? In terms of if it's inherent in the human family, then question of your work on climate change and the environment. And if you're saying that it is inherent, then even in societies which are not democratic, it exists. So the counter to saying that it's inherent is that it is a part of a social contract, or it is emanating from a particular kind of society. Those are the contradictions, aren't they?
So those are, all of that's true. And I think the question is whether that's a contradiction or not, right? So one of the things to try to figure out is dignity is inherent, but in the same sentence, it's somehow connected to rights, and we don't know how. And that's, I mean, frankly, to me, that's what reading all these cases is all about, is trying to figure out what is that connection. So I make a distinction when I talk about this, a distinction that is sort of subtle if you're not paying attention. So I want to draw attention to it. Dignity is one thing. It's the thing that's in you that's inherent. Dignity rights is a legal concept. It's what the law does to protect your dignity. And like any other rights, those are rights. Those can be defined by the government, etc. And those are part of the social contract. And I'm not sure that I'm willing to concede that it's a contradiction. I think it's an interesting relationship that we have to figure out. On the issue of the environment, I'll just say a couple of things about it. One is that if you've done any study of international human rights law, how many of you have studied international human rights? Okay, some. You probably never talked about the environment in your human rights study, because The United Nations didn't recognize that there was a right to a healthy environment until 3 years ago. The entire history of human rights law is as if the environment just is not a thing that's interesting. So as a legal matter, human rights has never been connected to environment. There are questions about rights of nature that maybe is what you were referring to. I think those are really, really interesting questions. And I've done some writing about it, but basically I think that it's, you have to sort of decide what you're going to focus on and what you're not. And I'm leaving rights of nature to other people, but I do think it's a really interesting question for exactly this reason. So the question that you posed is really sort of the question that's going to be a theme throughout the clinic, is what is the relationship between inherent dignity and rights? The philosopher Hannah Arendt says that dignity is the right to have rights. Okay? And I think that's kind of lovely, actually. I think it's a really very simple and very profound way of describing that relationship. We have inherent dignity, and what are the qualities of dignity? Well, we can talk about that, and that's what you wrote about. But one thing about dignity is that it gives you the right to have and to claim your rights. To me, that's a logical way of thinking about it. It's not the only way, but it's just a way that I use to think about it. If that's the case, then I think rights of nature is really interesting, right? Because then the question is, do dolphins have dignity? Do ecosystems have dignity, et cetera? Like, what gives them the right to have rights? The Inter-American Court in the climate change case, I actually can't quite figure out, and I haven't sort of read this thoroughly, but basically it was asked to address rights of nature, and it was really sort of begged to accept rights of nature. And I think what the Inter-American Court, don't hold me to this, said was, maybe so, but that's not what matters, because what matters is that people have a right to live with dignity, and that means living in a stable climate and in a healthy environment. So we don't have to worry about whether dolphins or ecosystems or rivers have rights. We can just, and sort of doing what I tend to do, which is to say, well, let's just talk about what we know. What we know is that humans have dignity and humans have rights. But again, I think those are really interesting questions. Yeah.
Population talked about that dignity, like the philosophy of talking about that dignity is a right to have other rights. Isn't it dangerous? Because in the end, if we say that if we take away the right to dignity, the right to other rights is also taken away.
She doesn't say dignity rights is the right to have rights. She says dignity is. And that again goes back to the point, if every one of us has dignity because we were born human, and dignity is inalienable and it's inherent, then that's all you need to be able to claim rights. It doesn't tell us what rights you have or how much or how they get balanced or applied. I mean, it doesn't answer like all those difficult questions that we lawyers spend time with. But it answers a really important thing about dignity and a really important thing about rights. That we have human rights because we have dignity. And so it can't, does that?
Got it.
Okay. And that's basically, you know, they're making that connection here. She wrote that, I believe, in the 1950s, so it was after this.
I think you did briefly address this, and I'm just going back to what Vasanthi ma'am was talking about with respect to dignity and nature. So, from what you said, the Inter-American Court, they held that they kind of linked like right to dignity with, let's say, with humans, right? They vested it with humans. That is, they have the right to live in a dignified environment. But is there sort of literature saying that, you know, nature in itself, like what you were saying,
Yes,
dogs and dolphins and all of that, do you think that they have dignity in themselves, or is there any judicial opinion or anything which help, maybe not exactly in the same words, but twists moving towards that direction?
So there's a growing body of law and literature about rights of nature, including here in India. There isn't much that I've seen that takes these difficult questions of dignity seriously in the context of nature. So those people who are writing about the rights of nature are not coming to it from dignity, and they're not really even coming to it from sort of a human rights perspective. What they're doing is coming to it from a perspective of environmental law hasn't protected us. We need to come up with something else. Let's give nature its own rights. And so it's a very pragmatic area of law, right? It's there to do a particular job, which is to protect the environment and nature more than traditional environmental law has done. I've tried to encourage people to write about this issue because I really want to know what the answer is, but I don't. The thing, and I just wanted to say about the case, because it came out a couple of days ago and I just haven't had time to like really in-depth look at it. I've looked to see what it says about rights of nature, and it actually doesn't say very much about it. So I think that they sidestepped it. But again, I'm not sure. Okay, so we're only here. Okay. Okay, and the last thing I want to say about that first sentence is just this. This is completely remarkable. The inherent dignity and equal rights of and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Just look at the work that dignity is doing. Dignity is the foundation of freedom and justice and peace in the world. So they're not only starting with it, but they're telling you, we need to pay attention to this because we're not going to get any of these things, freedom or justice or peace, without paying attention to dignity. They're not telling you why it's so important. They're not telling you what it means. They're not telling you how it's connected to rights, but they are telling you it's really, really important to the future of the world. This picks up from the UN Charter, and again, picks up this idea about promoting social progress and better standards of life and larger freedom. That's the language from the UN Charter. And I just want you to, again, just sort of tuck that away for now and notice how there's a suggestion that somehow reaffirming faith in dignity is going to give people more opportunity to live better lives, right? It's not just doing this geopolitical thing of protecting freedom and justice and peace. It's also giving people a chance to live better lives. And again, no explanation for it. Like if I were grading this, I would be like, where's your support for this? Right? But they didn't ask me. So I'm not. But it's a good idea. Okay, then we get to Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, after the preamble, is 30 articles listing rights that they think everybody should have, everybody across the globe should have. The very first one is this: all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Again, some of the things that we've been talking about. It's inherent, you're born with it, it's connected somehow to rights. Everybody has it inherently and equally. The only hint of explanation for why dignity is so important, and in fact, going back to the what about non-humans and all that, is the assertion that human beings, all human beings, are endowed with reason and conscience, right? So there's something that where they're saying humans are different. We're not saying anything about dolphins or dogs or ecosystem. We are just saying that humans have reason and conscience. So somehow dignity is connected to reason and conscience. And that's also just something to tuck away, something to just know is out there. And then last, reason and conscience, and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. So it's not just a declarative statement that people are born with dignity, or that people have reason and conscience, or that people have dignity and rights. Somehow that's connected. It's also a normative statement. Because we have dignity, that imposes an obligation on us. And that, again, is this sort of two-sided, this Janus face of dignity. It's inherent, but it also sort of regulates our behavior towards other people. So it matters in terms of our relationships as well as just in terms of who we are as human beings. We should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. I'm just going to continue a little bit and then we can take a break. So that's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In my view, that's sort of where this is like the fountain that gives rise to everything else that we see in dignity law.
So from what I've inferred is that this has a lot to do with semantics, which words we use, what's the, and the interpretations which we attach to this particular word, which is dignity. I have two questions. One, when this particular this was being framed, were there any other words in mind? And the second is, if yes or if no, what was the intention of using of this word?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really good question. And of course, that sort of, anybody who studies this and looks at it and takes it seriously wants to know those questions. We don't really know why they seized on dignity in this very important way. There's a lot of other provisions in the UDHR that got a lot more attention in the drafting. Some people say that they chose the word dignity because everybody agreed with it and they didn't have to agree with what it meant. But just like I could ask you all, do you all know what dignity means? You'd say yes. Is it a good thing? Yeah. That's all. That's enough to make it, to sort of get it into the document. They didn't have to agree on exactly what it was. I didn't focus on this, but I do think that the word faith is really interesting here because it's sort of saying we don't have to argue about it. We can just all believe in it. Like, let's just, in the post-World War II world, let's just agree that we all have human dignity. And that was sort of enough. There was talk in the preamble and even in association with the word dignity of saying things like somehow referring to God as being the basis for dignity, created by God, whatever the language is. And there was too much disagreement about that. And they wanted to use a phrase that was like very open and general, like we're not saying which God, we're just saying God. But even that, there was too much disagreement. So they dropped that out and just stuck with faith and dignity. But there's very little that's been written about it, about why they chose it, what else was, and the only alternative I know had to do with God. And so they kept the idea of faith, but dropped anything more specific than that. Okay, so we've talked about that. Just to continue a little bit with the sort of the history, we're still in 1945 with the founding of the United Nations, 1948 with the Declaration. The Declaration is non-binding. It goes before the General Assembly in December 10th, 1948, which is to this day celebrated in certain places as Human Rights Day. And the General Assembly adopts it. And of course, who's going to vote against it? Because it has no binding power. So really, what would be the point of voting against it? So it gets adopted. Then the UN General Assembly adopts it and goes back to the Human Rights Commission and said, well, you sort of dodged what we asked you to do. We wanted you to write a binding Declaration of Bill of Rights, and you wrote a non-binding one. So go back to the drawing board and write a binding one. Well, by then it's the late 1940s. The Cold War is starting. There's all kinds of other things going on, and they are unable to turn the declaration into a covenant or a treaty that would bind nations. And what they do instead is produce two documents, and there's a lot of reasons why, but the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. At this point in history now, today, almost all nations of the world have signed on to both of them. So it's as if there is one a binding human rights treaty, but they're actually in two separate documents. What's interesting about the two separate documents is that the preamble of both documents, which really go on to protect very different rights in very different ways, the preamble of both instruments are virtually identical. I mean, there's like one little place where there's a slightly different word, but other than that, the entire preamble is identical in both. And they both say, recognizing that these rights that are enumerated in these documents derive from the inherent dignity of the human person. So again, this idea of the dignity sort of producing these rights, the rights derive from the inherent dignity of the human person. So again, sort of repeating all the same like words and with all the same questions that we saw with the UGHR, but readopting that. And then also using this language, which we just saw in the preamble of the UDHR, it's also in the preamble of both covenants, right? So whether your rights are civil and political or social and economic and cultural, notice nothing about the environment in either of these. Either way, those rights derive from the inherent dignity of the human person. This is just the briefest possible summary of international human rights law. There are 9 core human rights treaties. They almost all mention dignity in some way. Most of them invoke this language from the UDHR and the international covenants. So the UN Charter, the Declaration of Human Rights, in 1965, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And again, you get this language that you see a lot, considering that the Charter of the United Nations is based on principles of dignity and equality inherent in the human being, right? So some various formulation that we've been seeing. 1965 is the racial discrimination. 1966 is the 2 international covenants that come into force in 1976. CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention Against Torture, the Convention on the Rights of the Child also talks about dignity. That is the most widely ratified of all of the conventions. Every nation except one has ratified it. I'm blushing so you can guess which one hasn't ratified it. Embarrassingly enough, but there we are. Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, etc. So, and the Convention on the Rights of Indigenous People under. So all of these mention dignity in this way of just sort of invoking it. Most of them don't really say anything about dignity. They just reaffirm and invoke and sort of keep this idea moving forward. Each of these conventions has a committee to monitor its enforcement. The Human Rights Committee is the committee, the arm of the UN that monitors the enforcement of the ICCPR, the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, Article 6 of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights protects the right to life. And General Comment 36 from 2018 says that the right to life is a right to live with dignity. This is a really big deal in international law, even though in India you've had it for decades. But it's part of international law. And then we also see it at the regional human rights levels. So the European human rights instruments, the European Convention, the European Social Charter, all of that talks about dignity either implicitly or explicitly. The African Charter of Human and People's Rights and the American Declaration and Convention and its protocols all talk about dignity. The ASEAN Charter also does talk about dignity. So we see it at the international level, sort of pervading international human rights law, and then we see it at the regional level. So skip that, and we're going to move on to this. So let's take a break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about dignity in constitutional law.